And one of the attributes that we must have when you want to serve, you must be capable of being ashamed. Many people in positions of authority in Africa, particularly at the political level and senior civil service level, are no longer ashamed.
They're shameless.
They are completely shameless. And on a daily basis, they do things that if they were to reflect upon, they would know that they have become subhuman in their behavior. But their conscience is numbed. Their conscience is seared. They have lost feeling. They are capable of stealing a whole cow and keeping it in the fridge while a child is dying there. This is who we have in most African countries in senior political offices and civil service. And that is why they can go around having stolen money in the millions, then they distribute it to massage their egos. They have killed systems so that systems don't work. They are the ones who have the yam and the knife, and they give you a little piece of the yam as long as you supplicate, go through.
On Africa as a new hero, at least according to TikTok, WhatsApp groups, and Instagram. The name of that hero, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, president of Burkina Faso. Do you see echoes of another great African, Thomas Sankara, in him, in his rhetoric and posture? Or, as some would say, many believe, he's simply a manifestation of Russian propaganda and disinformation, who's there to almost lull Africa's youth into a false sense of hope? What are your thoughts?
I think Captain Traoré is a symbol of something. The jury is still out as to his actual performance. And his rise to prominence as a symbol of change, as a symbol of resistance to a neo-colonial power, and the neo-colonial power is France in this regard, and by extension the conceptual West, must be seen at the level of symbolism. There is danger of simplicity, that we are being too simplistic, and therefore burdening even Traoré himself and his administration with things that they cannot achieve. I've seen very many speeches which are artificially generated being attributed to Traoré.
And projects and buildings.
Projected and things, even in certain cases in Niger, they even say they have made a plane, which of course you and me know are fiction. But to be positive about it, I believe that that environment and that mindset can be disciplined to be used in an effective way to mobilize people in a particular useful direction. And one of the things that I've said, I was about a year ago at a meeting which was convened by the foreign affairs ministers of the Sahel countries in Bamako. And at that meeting, the foreign ministers of Niger was there, the foreign minister of Mali, the foreign minister of Guinea, the foreign minister of Burkina Faso, and the foreign minister of Togo. And my message was, let us remember that as we move forward, we'll have no shortage of enemies. That as we move forward, we'll have to ensure that our agenda is understood and cascaded to the mass, to the majority of the people. As we move forward, let us not imprison ourselves in empty slogans. Let us learn from history that if you are an individual, you will be eliminated. And I recounted the number of people who were eliminated. I talked of Olympia in 1963. I talked of Amilcar Cabral, I talked of Lumumba, I talked of Thomas Sankara, and I said, what is my preferred approach? That we must have so many voices across the continent of Africa that even if you eliminate one or some, the movement goes forth. It must not be an individuated thing. We must not create a Moses who will be parting Red Seas for us and summoning pillars of fire to stand between us and the enemies. So what I would love, now that we have the advantage of TikTok, to remember that unless it is a movement, it will have the lifespan of a butterfly or a mosquito.
What does his emergence as an African icon tell you about our need, Africa's need, our youth's need for a hero, for a symbol, for hope?
Perhaps there is a deep desire in the minds and hearts of a good number of Africans to have African solutions to African problems, to have Africa defining her agenda and owning that agenda, to have a systems that defy the colonially inherited system. That is what it is, and is also a message by the younger people that we do not want octogenarians to dominate the political space. We want to see younger people being given their pride of place, even if they are to be guided by older people. It is a message to those who have remained in politics for too long in the African continent that their time is to transit and to hold the hands of younger people. That is the message. But as I've already said, it is very important to ask the question, because it also calls into question governance. Remember that the Sahelian countries were ostracized by the economic community of West African states and also ostracized by the African Union on the ground that they rose to power unconstitutionally contrary to the Malabo Declaration. But people are saying, we don't care. We don't care because you people, in the name of the thing that you call democracy, you've managed to rig electoral processes so that we cannot get the men and women we want and we deserve into positions of leadership. I myself have said, when I was asked, I said that what you are calling coup d'etats are extraordinary change of power necessitated by a toxic environment or toxic environments that do not allow good people to emerge. My caution, and I hope this is my desire, that going forward, what is going to happen is that my people in that area, Traoré, Atimi Goita, and others are going to be midwives of a new dispensation. So that the 5 years that they have given themselves are going to be 5 years of redefining and rethinking governance, so that when they leave office, then they will have created an enabling environment that will allow leaders who are faithful to their countries to emerge. I pray and hope that they will not drop their military fatigues, wear suits, and then succeed themselves. So we Africans must also tell our story. We must create media houses that have the capacity to do so. You as individuals who are now getting into this space, you are much better than many African media houses combined, because you are giving news which is unmediated, undoctored. And in our minds, therefore, particularly the minds of the middle class who watch television, we think the Gaza war is much more important than what is happening in Sudan. And in any event, the Sudanese are dying in larger numbers. We don't care what is, if you ask people if there's a conflict in Mozambique, they don't know. If there are conflict in South Sudan, they don't know. But on a daily basis, you watch Al Jazeera. It occupies 30 minutes and repeated over and again, France, so CGTN, all these, so that when there is the death of an Israeli is big deal, and Ukraine, it is big deal. I almost know how many drones were sent to Kyiv, or how many drones Kyiv sent to Russia. Once again, we must tell our story. We don't tell our story sufficiently, and even the thing that is now called international order, what is it? Israel has ignored every decision of the ICJ, has ignored every resolution. So when I see now that the DRC and I think Benin have now become members of the Security Council again, of what value? In a nutshell, I think Africa labors under our weakness. We are weak. Politically, we are weak. Economically, we are weak. And because we are weak, our voices are weak. And because our voices are weak, we can be ignored. And because we are ignored, we are also ignoring ourselves. And that is tragic. Can we do something about it? Yes, we can and must. One of the things that I look forward to in the next 5 to 10 years is greater impetus in having a single voice from Africa, starting as it must with the regional blocs. If East African community could begin to have these voices coming out a lot more, and I was happy in the early days when efforts were being made to be sensitive to what is happening in Congo, and East African leaders were coming in very quickly. South Sudan, or rather the South Sudan situation, when you went to SADC, there was an immediate reaction from SADC, although very weak. In West Africa, there was an immediate reaction. They reacted to the coups in the Sahel, but not to the genocide that is taking place in Ambazonia in South Cameroon. Once again, all these are happening because who pays for them? You would be shocked that even some of these peace initiatives, you'll find some European NGOs as the ones who are funding the meetings
and
paying hotel bills for African ministers.
And he who pays the piper
calls the tune. That is the cliche and the saying at once. So in a nutshell, until the day that the continent of Africa puts its act together, we are going nowhere. And
the crisis, let's now go from West Africa, let's go to Central Africa. The crisis in Eastern Congo is often treated as maybe a local or a regional issue. Yet for me, it speaks to everything that Africa still struggles with. Weak states, colonial borders, foreign extraction, and ethnic scapegoating. Why has the rest of Africa largely turned a blind eye to this very issue?
If you look at the spiritual books, starting even with books that are not anchored, or spirituality not anchored in books, African spirituality, the Bible, the Quran, the Hindu Gita, the Torah, it was always the case that you take care of your neighbor. Because what happens in your neighborhood, whether you like it or not, will somehow affect you. But for some reason, African leaders, particularly those who are dictators, always took the view that what is happening is in your neighborhood must not and should not be your concern. And you could see these if you talk about what is Congo, then became Zaire, then became the Democratic Republic of Congo, that at critical times, we did not give it the attention. In the early days, it was not the case. If you look at, for example, in the first crisis of Congo, Kwame Nkrumah was very involved, and Ghana. In terms, he even wrote a book, The Challenge of the Congo. You could see that even Lumumba himself went to Accra and sought assistance. You could see that there was general interest in ensuring the stability of Congo, with Nkrumah himself saying that until the day that the Congo settles, Africa will never be at ease.
And he was right.
And he was right. Africa has never been at ease. I mean, we are talking about a country that is as large as the entire Western Europe. But with many nations within a state, over 300 nationalities trying to be wedded into a single state, it requires statesmanship. It requires somebody who understands, or a group of people who understand. And unfortunately, the leaders that Congo have had after Lumumba, whether it's Kasavubu or Mobutu, have failed spectacularly. Failed spectacularly because they have been short-termists. There has never been, in my view, a deliberate desire to ensure that the country functions. Even the two Kabilas, who in my view had the goodwill, not only of the Congolese, but even the neighborhood, did not do. I mean, if you want to drive, if you can at all, from Goma to Kinshasa, you can't.
It's impossible.
One would have thought that one of the major things that ought to have been done during the two Kabilas is to go infrastructure. Instead, what was allowed is for Western extractors and thieves
And Chinese.
and Chinese lately to thrive with the consequence that Eastern Congo is one of the busiest airspaces in the world. And the reason is, if there is disorder, if the center does not hold, mere anarchy is loosed upon the country, to use T.S. Eliot's, then everybody extracts. And the Tshisekedi administration has failed spectacularly, because of lack of appreciation that there was work to be done. And the neighborhood has tried to do something. To their credit, let's say, although the efforts have not yielded much, but I have seen the efforts that were being undertaken by President João Lourenço, the effort that was being made through Kenya with the former President Uhuru Kenyatta and the African Union, but they have been too feeble. So what has happened with the Kinshasa administration is to be simplistic about it. To say it is Rwanda that is in the business of destabilizing Congo. It is Uganda that is in the business of destabilizing the Congo. The M23 are sponsored by Rwanda. The ADF is, that I think is escapist. The reality is that Congo, like all African countries, had arbitrary boundaries imposed on it. And for that reason, you find populations across the border with different nationalities. And it's not unique to that region. Masa is in Tanzania. The Nuer in South Sudan and Ethiopia. The Oromo in Kenya and Ethiopia. How then do you address it? You address it, in my view, by looking at the circumstances. I'm now involved in some WhatsApp group where somebody has said, we need to find a solution for Congo. And my argument is the African Union, perhaps even before we go to the African Union, the East African community ought to sit DRC down, but they don't want to be sat down. But SADC tried to sit them down. They don't want to be sat down.
The other day,
Yes.
there were East African forces
Yes.
that were, so the East Africans sat down
Yes.
and said, let us bring a force that will separate the belligerents. The Congolese government kicked them out.
Yes. There is a saying in Kiswahili, sikio la kufa halisikii dawa, that when an ear is getting to a stage where it will become deaf, whatever medicine you apply, it will not respond to. And I dare say that until the Tshisekedi administration in Kinshasa realizes that you must, or they must, solve the problem, and that they need the neighborhood to solve the problem, they are not going anywhere. Remember that the DRC is a member of multiple regional bodies. It is a member of SADC. It is a member of East African Community. It is a member of Central African Community. It is also continentally a member of the African Union. The reality on the ground is that the Kinshasa administration does not have total and effective control of its territory. When you find yourself in such a situation, metaphorically speaking, you are in a hole. You stop digging. You then have rapprochement with your neighbors. You then have what in the days of the Soviet Union and the United States of America called détente. You talk to people that you may not like, and you sit down both with your people on the ground with the help of neighbors. You don't go into orgiastic chest thumping. You don't go back to the colonial masters. You don't look for neighbors or for enemies where the enemies are not. Until the day the Kinshasa administration admits that and is seen to be actively involved, then they are going nowhere. Because if you expel the East African force, you'll still meet them at the AU. At least you'll also meet one of them again at SADC. You'll meet another one of them again in Central Africa. So what are you running away from? From your shadow? And I'm happy that pressure is being brought to bear. Although I would have liked the Doha meeting to be held in Addis Ababa with African mediators, but when you are in trouble, any effort that solves the trouble is to be appreciated. You are going nowhere. And it is this man, Kwame Nkrumah, in 1963 when he was speaking, he was in a sense of hurry. People said, oh, he just wanted to be the president of Africa. What if he wanted to be? But what did he say? We must live here with one army. We must talk about a single currency. We must speak with one voice diplomatically. We must be one. Because he could foresee, and when he writes his book, Neo-Colonialism, the last stage of imperialism, and he there said, the most dangerous. We are living in those times. Times when you can see the neo-colonizers are desperate.
They need resources
They
and
need
people.
resources and people, to use the slang that is now in the lingua franca of the young people. People are woke. You can see France, for example. I'm told that the meeting of the Francophonie could possibly be held even in Nairobi in 2026. You can see they are now beginning to get into countries that were not formally colonized by them. You can see that even when their noses have been blooded, they still want to get into rapprochements, wearing velvet glove and to cover their fists of iron. There is desperation, which should send a message to Africans that this is the time to unite. And it is not just the traditional colonizers that are in the continent.
No.
China is here now.
Turkey
is here. Russia
UAE
is here. The UAE is here. In other words, there is a new scramble for Africa. Everybody knows except us. And if we know, we are not bothered. Once again, in our accommodating style, we are allowing the camel to enter through the head. Before we know it, it will have occupied the whole tent. To Kenya more often. One of the things that we must encourage young Africans is to travel across the continent. Of course, I know it is difficult. You can't use road. The airfares are very expensive. We have no rails except the one that are hauling goods. Those are the problems that need to be resolved.
Yes.
Yes.